Political commentator James Martin now looks at the results of the Makerfield by-election and what it means with Andy Burnham winning the seat, becoming an MP again and potentially running for leadership and becoming the next Prime Minister of the UK. And what does it mean in terms of the popularity of reform? The interview is next. The insights of J. Martin on our world. Society and politics. The J. Martin interview. Hi, it's Saturday lunchtime. That means it's a couple of days after the election that has just happened in Ashton and Makerfield. I think it's a part of Wigan. It's in the constituency. It was divided. I actually got invited to the count, which is an interesting story about what happened with that, as well as what happened in general. Lisa Nandy, I did see her, and she's in the neighbouring constituency, which is part of Wigan. So it's a very it's where George Orwell lived. The road to Wigan Pier. It's where the Wigan Diggers Festival that takes place, and it was the constituency chosen. That Andy Burnham chose after he did apply to do the Gorton and Denton constituency to stand in, and it is. I think is it fair to say it's rumoured, because it's not really officially confirmed that this is part of a plan that he has to challenge the leadership of Keir Starmer if he gets enough Labour MPs. And I don't think it's a vote of no confidence. I'm not sure if that's what it's called. I should know. But he has to get 81 MPs behind him to do this leadership bid that he's rumoured to do. And he can do it, and he can now do it because he got a fairly substantial victory as to become the MP of the Ashton and Makerfield constituency. Coming 10,000 or so votes behind was the Reform candidate, so Rob Keenan. He had a bit of a PR disaster, I think, when he seemed to almost directly copy the idea of using what Hannah Spencer's, appeal to. I'm just an ordinary person. I've got a business. He wanted to appear as a plumber, and he had this van, and people started pointing out this is looking quite a new van. It doesn't seem to have the tools to be a plumber. It might have been hired. I don't know if that's been confirmed or not, but that was the rumour around it. He had about 10,000 votes less. Restored and split the vote a little bit, and they came third with quite a few votes, but it wouldn't have been enough collectively anyway to stop Andy Burnham's 24,000. So yes, what are your thoughts? Obviously, so that's that's who came first, second, and third, with the Conservatives distantly behind that. So I'm welcoming James Martin now. James Martin, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, it's good to be back, Michael. Yes, it's been a bit of time. We should meet up more often when there's not political storms brewing, etc. But Ashton and Makerfield, the Makerfield constituency. There is zero doubt for me, and I think anyone, that Andy Burnham is clearly and very clearly has his eyes on number 10, or perhaps, as we should say, number 11, because that's where he lives, or the Prime Minister lives, I suppose, in the apartment there. But yeah, his eyes are very clearly on number 10, and I think there's a few points to raise. Firstly, I mean, there's going to be a mayoral election. I do wonder whether some of the chatter I've heard and been involved in, I suppose, is that Gary Neville might replace or seek to replace Burnham as Mayor of Greater Manchester. But if I just come back to the results, well, I mean, I was surprised. I had said relatively publicly that I thought there would be about 2,000 votes in it. Quite clearly, that isn't and hasn't been the case. Andy Burnham won in the constituency, standing, and I think this is important, not just as Labour, but Labour co-op. And in the middle of a government term, by-elections generally don't favour the incumbent government, but he's very clearly bucked the trend, gaining 54.8% of the vote, which was up 9.6% on 2024. And excuse me, the turnout, was up. Turnout was up 6.3%. So, firstly, fought after by-election here. It was very clear from the get-go that this would be a Reform Labour battle, and I think there was some mistakes made in, for example, the Greens and the Liberals even fielding a candidate. But the Liberals, for example, really barely getting above. You said you were at the count, but we've got to mention the other count, Count Binface, who, gained 95 votes to the Liberals' 163. It just begs the question why you would bother damaging your reputation electorally by standing. But yeah, the Reform candidate Robert Kenyon, yes, it was very clear. I'm sort of Joe the plumber. As they have in the United States, very much trying to emulate Gorton by-election. Couldn't, because there was always an air of dishonesty around him. A lot of the images that he was using for his campaign were AI-derived.
We've got that now in 26, haven't we? The ability to do that. But then the van wasn't AI, but it was maybe hired.
No, and lots of images. I mean, there was an image I saw of him near a table or leaning on a table, with a Reform leaflet in his hand, and yet in the background, there were pipes and bits of. It was clearly, I'm on the job sort of thing. Well, I wouldn't hire him if he was a plumber because the piping was all over the show. Point is, it was clearly AI derived. Then you have his, got to be careful here, but his liking of a post, a pretty vulgar one about Carol Vorderman. Whilst I'm sure there'll be lots of people who've liked things that they perhaps wish they hadn't. If you are running for office, you should expect scrutiny. For this. So I think he was beginning to be damaged goods anyway. And whilst the Labour Party is unpopular, when Robert Kenyon is running a campaign that said, vote for me, get rid of Keir, well, actually, you could just vote for Andy Burnham, who's quite popular in Greater Manchester. You could vote for him and realistically get rid of Keir. And I think that is ultimately what won it for Andy Burnham.
Because when you said about the incumbent government, because they've had the disastrous local council elections, so it was there was the result in Welsh Labour were virtually wiped out. So this isn't the vote for the government, is it? Because there's a lot of campaign posters on the way in. I saw said "Vote Hope, vote Andy Burnham." They actually slightly outnumbered the Reform posters by about the margin, I think, that the votes did. So, e.g., there was. If it was 24,000, it was sort of a third more at least of the Andy Burnham one. So it's a vote. It's kind of a vote where people know that he might be able to replace Keir Starmer, and so therefore it's just another victory against the Keir Starmer Labour government as the other ones were.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredibly clear when you have Labour. I mean, I for one don't take opinion polls. I think that old one of is there any such thing as public opinion or just published opinion? I think opinion polls, even down to this by-election, have been wildly out. But if we do take the fact that Labour's running at about 19% in those polls, and yet can win with 55% of the vote in a by-election, That's not explained by Labour's policies, but it has to be about the person. Like I'm sure many people listening to this, I have family who work near to the constituency, live near the constituency, in fact, around the sort of broader Lee and Wigan area. And it's Makerfield for anyone, or Ashton and Makerfield to be exact, and for anyone who's never visited, is a town that certainly had pride in work, but like so many towns across the country, you have potholes, you have rundown services, you have the things like we can have a cycle path, but there's plenty of fines if cars stray onto them. Parking fines and all of this. And I know that might sound like a bit of a non sequitur. However, what these do is shut down businesses. So you don't have customers going into shops because cost of parking's too high, risk of fines, fuel's too high, roads blocked by tractors. Part of this constituency is quite rural. So you have all of this, and it's the sort of town centre of Ashton is very reflective of a lot of towns from Plymouth to Hull to Carlisle. Betting shops, charity shops, Turkish barbers, and quite depressed areas. To be fair, there are of course nice places and all this. So with that, you've seen reform and more dangerously the extreme right neo-fascist Restore Britain Party, or Restore UK, or whatever they want to call themselves this week, really targeting areas like that. As you see, it's these politicians that have led your towns to be run down. It's the fault of other people for the reason that you're financially struggling, etc. Now, whilst we'll know that that's not necessarily true, it is in these areas that reform are doing well. Traditionally, Labour has offered socialist answers. I mean, Labour's not ever been a socialist party. It's had socialists in it. But traditionally, it is always said that, we will take money from, the rich and distribute it to the poor, if you want to take the Robin Hood analogy there. And then Labour gets into government in 2024 and does absolutely nothing. In fact, it makes the situation worse. It rose back on taxing, private schools. It rose back on increasing taxes on the wealthy. Instead, they end up cutting, and we see cutting of welfare entitlements for the disabled, to the elderly, and people are left scratching their heads as to what this Labour Party is. And that, to sort of conclude this, is has led over into unpopularity with Keir Starmer and the broader Labour Party. If put it to you like this, if it wasn't Andy Burnham standing in this by-election, which incidentally this by-election was probably inevitable, Josh Simons, of course, had been and was, I think, being investigated due to orchestrating some smear campaigns against journalists, which is against the ministerial code. I think we'd have been there anyway, but if it wasn't Burnham, you would be seeing, at least from these results, potentially a reform, a new reform MP.
So yes, and all those things. Because a lot of people were behind Jeremy Corbyn because he was, on these progressive issues, and then Keir Starmer would seem, the overall position would seem more like, at best, a conservative-like position, wouldn't it, on these things? For example, one that you said there, the £50 a week cut for new claimants on the Universal Credit Health, which is what replaced ESA, Employment Support Allowance. Also, maybe the drive for progressive things like, increasing social housing, and really we're seeing more of the same, except for things like the Renters Reform Bill, which have made it easier for tenants and abolished Section 21. But but overall, doesn't look as much like even a Labour government would look like.
No, it's the government is. Let's be clear about who this is. The person who leads the Labour Party who in government, is Keir Starmer, and he's surrounded by sycophants. Sycophants with the hands in the pockets, and probably in the till as well. We know, for example, the likes of David Lammy loves an expenses claim, as well as donations from groups such as Labour Friends of Israel, etc. It's those people who are completely disconnected from the realities of people on the street. And what they don't get is that when people see the likes of Elon Musk, for example, becoming the world's first trillionaire, whilst there are some very bizarre people who celebrate that, for the majority of people, we ask the question, how can there be a trillionaire?
In the first place?
That shouldn't exist. It's not possible for anyone to spend that level of money in a lifetime, and not within his many, many, many children's lifetimes either. So, how have they ended up with all of this wealth? Well, as we understand, they don't get taxed. Now, unfortunately, general media will not talk about that because, oddly enough, they're run by some of these hyper-wealthy people. There's only effectively 6 families / organisations that run the print media in the UK. That's unfair, and they are obsessed with keeping their newspaper sales up, and the way that they do that is causing division, because more stories. So we've had this obsession with boats, we've had this obsession. What the government has done is decided that, well, what we'll do, we'll move further and further to the right, copying the likes of Reform and including Restore, when it is the reality that a lot of the people who back those parties would never vote Labour. So it's not exactly vote winning. And then where you have Starmer, who proudly boasts, "Oh, if you don't like what I'm doing, then leave the party," and then looks around and people have. He has brought the Labour Party to the brink of destruction. It's not a party I would even recognise, and I think what we're also beginning to see quite clearly is that, yes, if we must talk about Jeremy Corbyn and what have you, that yet again, some of his decisions as leader, with hindsight, were absolutely on the money. He was right about the genocidal actions that the state of Israel are undertaking. We always need to remind ourselves that the people of Israel, there are a number of people who are as unhappy with what their government are doing as those who support. He was right about the United States. He was right about, even going into lockdown with, broadband communism, I think we all remember. Well, actually, that would have been quite nice for the 2 years we were all effectively locked down. So, yeah, his vision of what could be achieved would have brought Britain back to somewhere around 1994. There isn't any vision about the country. Everything every decision the government has made has been for short-term gain. We are going to find ourselves waking up one day and the power's out because we haven't actually thought about building like a long-term construction in terms of energy. Housing's already with us. When Thatcher was selling off houses that she didn't have the right to sell, oddly enough, that did nothing for community house building at all. And they're not vote winners. Who cares who initiated the programme if they're coming to fruition in 20 years? We have a climate catastrophe where we've known about this for quite some time, and we haven't done anything to insulate. In fact, we've withdrew funding for things like solar paneling, insulation, etc., etc. So I think generally, and I do speak to as many people as possible with lots of different views, but it feels like the country is in a mess. It feels divided and bereft of any hope. I urge caution, though, to those who think that Andy Burnham is some sort of, magical hero and, the next Clem Attlee. He won't be.
I was going to get onto that, so what the differences could be. One is also a feeling of authoritarianism with maybe with the Keir Starmer run Labour. Say some of the proclamations. Everybody over the age of 18 is going to be banned from smoking. Would sound like it's noble, but it's an absolute ban on it. The outright ban on social media. Platforms and sites. It could be used for positive things as well. I guess for under 16s is controversial as well. It seems almost they seem to go for bans, an almost authoritarian rule in some respects.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that there are elements. Really, when it comes to this government and the last one, they were utterly clueless in producing policies. And so you've seen, I can give you some examples of this. The pasty tax. Is it too warm or too cold? I don't know. I've read Goldilocks and I'm still not quite sure. You had the bedroom tax. Well, how enforceable is that? You had banning smoking. This thing comes up every now and again. Really? Good luck enforcing that in people's homes and actually on the streets as well. There's lots of very poorly thought out notions coming through that just haven't been scrutinised or, in fact, the outcome realised. If you want to stop people smoking, there are two things you can do: improve health services, a provision of things like tobacco patches, etc. Perhaps simultaneously not ban things like e-cigarettes as well. Although I do appreciate more investigation needs to be taken with them. That's what you do. You increase health services, you run campaigns, and we know that it does have an effect. As soon as you ban something, you move something effectively underground. I was speaking to a friend and colleague just a few days ago about the proposed social media ban. And whilst in general I'm in favour of elements of it, we all know the minute you ban things, it goes underground. So for social media under 16s, well, we've all heard of VPNs. They're going to be very popular if they're not already.
Ban them as well. So yes, so the idea of the upcoming cigarette bill is that anybody over the age of 18, born in 2009 and after, will never be able to legally buy cigarettes. Although without on the social media ban for under 16s, so will these be forms of digital ID would be needed? Otherwise, you could just not reveal your age, couldn't you?
Well, again, government should perhaps focus on, you know, the, um, the gangs of generally politicians, celebrities, etc. Who've preyed upon children. Perhaps they might want to focus on them rather than, a barely enforceable act. So, can you prove how old you are? So, you would have someone who, if you're born in a leap year, you're really stuck, aren't you? I suppose in many ways. Or, you've got someone born on, the 1st of June and, they're sat next to someone on the 2nd of June. Well, one can swear. We've heard about this before. In terms of the authoritarianism, again, we hear this as well. People get the governments they deserve. Labour didn't win the last election. The Tories lost it. The idea, you're holding governments to account, scrutiny, and all of that is everyone's job. But I just cannot see, this Labour Party with most of its MPs defending, majorities of a couple of hundred, if that. In those constituencies, the sitting MP will be opposing things that are not popular. And I do think there are several things. I think Starmer is totally and utterly devoid of any real emotion. I think he seems to have these man tantrums when something doesn't go his way. We know that he's threatened to quit when by-elections. I think in Hartlepool had lost, he threatened to quit. Well, oddly enough, a lot of us were hoping he would. He just seems to have this notion of it's my way or no way. He keeps referring that, he was in the Crown Prosecution Service. Well, actually, staff there thought he was weak, incompetent, and useless. We should, all of us perhaps have, certainly for those who voted for him as Labour leader, I should say, perhaps should have listened. To people. And by the way, when I was a member of the Labour Party, I most certainly didn't vote for him. But he's devoid of any vision, and he's been a proven liar all the way through. His dad wasn't a toolmaker. His dad was a factory owner. Let's be clear. When he says, "Oh, I didn't know this," and yet we find out he did, I'm going to have competent Corbynism, he says, and then immediately seeks to purge anyone who might be left. He's tainted. I think the country is tired of liars. And when you think about every prime minister that's been forced out, it's in recent UK history, post-war, you could argue, every single one of them, it's because of lies. So I just think that, there is it will feel for a short period that there is a breath of fresh air in terms of Burnham. Absolutely. But it is very important to note that he's not going to be some hero. He'll be the first Prime Minister from the northwest of England. Won't hear anyone screaming Harold Wilson. He was from Huddersfield. I do think there is something unique in the character of people from the north, and I'm not on about Yorkshire. Sorry, everyone, but I'm on about the proper north. I am slightly biased with this one. But he's going to be facing, a British military that's on its knees, an economic situation that is woeful, endemically low growth, severely, and in some instances beyond repair, services that are so completely underfunded. if you go with traditional economics, on paper we couldn't afford them. So the only thing he will be able to do is, tax the wealthy. And some of us have been arguing for some time now that, he should introduce a Robin Hood tax, for example. Something that wouldn't affect anyone. How about getting money back from the banks? It's $1.5 trillion that they got from the people. Why should we pay it back? Can we have it back, please?
Yeah, 2008. Yeah, it's to finally write that one. Yeah. So this is a little bit about what the differences might be actually like. I know that William Gladstone has some connections with the North. That's the Northwest is the only other one I could find, really. Go back a long way. So. What's happened?
Gladstone, yeah.
Yeah, Gladstone, yeah. Can what's happened with Andy Burnham and being mayor of Manchester and his scheme with the buses and things like that give a bit of a clue as to, how much he might be a bit more like Jeremy Corbyn compared to Keir Starmer? Or so what do you actually think? You do say that it's going to be really challenging from the position that Britain is in now. How different do you think he would be?
Definitely not Corbyn. I would suggest we'd be reverting back to something like Gordon Brown. Now, Gordon Brown, I think, was a decent prime minister. I'd just argue just on Gladstone, by the way, whilst he was, of course, he was born in Liverpool, just as Andy Burnham was. As far as I remember, I think he was brought up in a Scottish family, was he not?
Oh, yeah. Button has connections
to some slave owners, I think. But anyway, either way, yes, I wouldn't consider him a northerner by any account. But no, I think what you've got is you are going to find someone. I mean, he was considered as being on the right of the Labour Party under Brown. But the Overton window has shifted so much to the right that he's now considered somewhat to the left of Starmer. So, if anyone's thinking there's going to be some Clement Attlee 1945 government where we'll have mass nationalisation, I think he'll seek to nationalise or the Manchester model with public transport, buses, for example, which isn't quite nationalisation. I think that certainly as former Minister of Health, he would, seek to put some resources into health. Ultimately, he is going to need to raise money.
And that could be by taxes having to go a bit higher.
Well, the thing is, Starmer bottled it when there were taxes on property, and the likes of Jeremy Clarkson going, "Oh, these are taxes." On farmland is how it was presented, and of course, what nonsense! It wasn't. It was inherited property. That's so bottled it on that after. The likes of Clarkson, started to drive tractors. Does anyone think for a minute Jeremy Clarkson uses a tractor every day?
Well, when he's filming Clarkson's farm, maybe. Yeah, for Amazon, possibly.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the minute the camera stops recording, he's off in some carve. Anyway, that was a tax on, effectively an introduction of tax as a clever method, as some people do, purchase land in order to avoid, things like inheritance tax. So, ultimately, what would be a very silly thing for him to do would be to increase taxes in any way, shape, or form on the average person. The lower tax bracket, if you will. I would suggest whether he whether he's listening to this, I don't know. But I would suggest a mixture of things like a Robin Hood tax or a Tobin tax, which is a tax on microtransactions effectively in the city. The 0.05% tax would yield over 30 billion. He's going to need to, I would suggest enforcing taxes on social media companies would be another thing for him to do. I would suggest that he clamp down further on tax avoidance and evasion. Hey, let's throw in, how about the dependencies get an MP and shut down the tax havens? He's going to have to raise revenue somehow.
Because it might be, you think he might be different, when it comes to social housing and benefits, for example?
Well, we know that the Preston model has worked. The community wealth building, could be something that he utilises from Preston, and elsewhere. That could be something that he does. I do like we are told that there is a housing shortage, yet incredibly, it's something like 70% of housing, in London is empty because it's an asset.
As well as the brownfield. So yeah, there's ones where there's just being hoarded like that. There's also there's been this proliferation now of increasing HMOs being the only thing available, where you people don't even get their own kitchen or bathroom. There's a lot of brownfield sites where it could be converted, as well as the loss of the social housing stock. But this government, through the right to buy, we're still seeing the result of that, because of course the idea, as you said, was not to replace them whatsoever. So there's been very little new social housing created. But this government did say, Jeremy Corbyn said about building 1 million places. This government also said about building houses. But I would. I would assume that it's actually going to be private-owned houses only for first-time buyers at best, but not everybody available for social rent.
It takes something like 3,500 years to achieve the house building targets the government has made. We're building in Greenland, a greenfield places, and I'm using that as a play on words because those areas of greenery, for example, are often floodplains. And we wonder why it is that, for example, in Carlisle, where we've seen lots of flooding, lots of these new builds get flooded straight away. We should be, the one thing is, if you put money into, those derelict buildings, if you convert them into housing where possible, that money that goes into towns, if you look at it as a form of infrastructure spending, the government could purchase them, redevelop them for council stock, and the money that goes into them benefits immediately the local area, because construction workers need to travel. They also need feeding, watering, putting up, etc. So you could do that. A lot of ultimately, I suppose, government is choice. We can find money to send to Ukraine, but we can't find money for helping ordinary people. That's a choice. That's not a necessity. But I've mentioned Ukraine. There is no doubt we are hurtling towards a conflict, and I'm a pacifist by nature, but unfortunately, when pragmatism says that's all very nice, but when we've got Russian warships firing on yachts in the Channel, that's the Russians testing our defences, and we are woeful in preparedness.
Yeah, because there's only something like there's about 75,000 people or less now in the British Army. So that's why there was some tabloid articles about conscription even potentially making a comeback.
The Navy's struggling with recruitment. I mean, there's more admirals than captains. More admirals than ships. It really isn't a good state of play, and that's really because we've been used to times that are relatively stable. Over the past militarily in Europe, I should say. But 2014 saw the first, the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine. They annexed Crimea. We saw Trump, and we have seen destabilization, across Europe. So, yeah, there is that feature in. My message, if anyone cares to listen or anything, would be Britain could be the centre of another industrial revolution, a green one. There were signs of that under Brown when he, organised grants for solar panelling, etc. It is, this is something that we could do if we had a serious industrial strategy in the UK, which we've been lacking since 1979.
So yeah, so the potential for conflict is slightly there. Well, at least it seems very tense and everything. So we have this situation now where it seems that although people said, oh well, it bucked the trend because Andy Burnham was elected at all over the Reform candidate, but there does seem to be this popularity of the right, and then these increasing sort of anti-immigration right protests and even riots in some cases. So Reform was second, and Restore Britain were third with quite a few thousand votes. So what do you actually make of this overall trend and their chances of actually getting more MPs when it comes to a general election?
Well, again, the far right succeed. We've known this for a century plus. The far right succeed when they are able to stoke division. They other people. They target people with disabilities, people of different religions, skin color, etc. The reason they do that, or the reason they succeed in doing so, is when people are feeling angry and needing to displace that anger, and without being too blunt about it, very few people will blame the people who's caused effectively 20 years, let's say 15 years of misery, lack of pay, decent pay increases, increasing bills. And that's the banks. They caused the crash. They stole, in my opinion, £1.5 trillion from us. We printed money for them, and then we were told that we had to repay, and there's no money for Sure Start or Remploy factories, for example, which I would like to see come back.
Yeah.
So yeah, unless people, the way to defeat the far right is, and unfortunately is to make people feel like they've got, they're prospering and all of this.
So there were factories for people with disability, and they were closed at the same time as politicians were talking about. So you should try to work. We should try to get more people with disability into work as they close those.
Yeah, and and coming back to your to the point around reform and stuff. Well, okay. In this by-election, Burnham gained more votes than every other party combined, but it doesn't stop the national trend. Restore are I think the closest we've seen to a fascist party since before the Second World War. And I think that their supporters, etc., are exceptionally proud of that. I think reform will end up chasing them even further to the right. I think as things stand, I would suggest if a general election was held today, that you would see a minority reform government. But we are just just over 3 years away from an election, a general election, and I tend to think that reform have probably peaked. There'll be infighting, but we'll be outflanked by a hard right, restore Britain. To be fair, I think the traditional parties are finished because they are not. It is really clear they are not listening to what people need.
No, that's the thing, because a lot of a lot of Tories and Conservatives have joined Reform, so they would seem, like it's a Conservative Party that's even more to the right, say.
Well, yeah, I mean, even down to the attack in Belfast last week, where you had these Reform people come out and say, "Oh, look at this Labour Party." Well, actually, sorry, Suella Braverman was the person who granted entry, for the apparent assailant, and she's in Reform. So if Reform has the look of a party of failed Tories. I think that will come to bite them. But my fear is, as a lifetime anti-fascist campaigner, anti-racist, and a very proud supporter of equalities, however they look. Restore will restore Britain to a vision of the future that Mosley was trying to achieve. And that's not something I think deep down anyone in Britain really wants, but, with the exception of a handful. The fact that they gathered, 3,111 votes in Makerfield should be a very stark warning to us all. Unless things change, people feel that they have money to spend in the pocket. We've got 2 pubs closing per week. People can't afford to drink in a pub. That social aspect is sort of going. Potholes in roads, public transport is on its backside. The health system's increasingly privatised when services should be being brought into health. We see the likes of Palantir and, these other vultures then hoovering up contracts left, right and centre. So unless there is a real about turn, we are just sleepwalking into a hard right future for Britain. And a Britain that's isolated around the world. A friend like the United States, well, there's never been a special relationship. It's always been a one-way relationship. We did have a problematic, but, sort of a bit like a marriage relationship with the EU. And I think there's a lot of buyer's remorse around that. So perhaps even, Burnham bringing us back into the customs union or something like that, it would, I think, assist economically. It would unfortunately also have the effect of fueling reform, etc. So we're in a bit of a pickle, Michael, is where I am coming from, and there are always choices in politics. Let's just hope that Burnham, who, again, as I said at the start of the program, Burnham most certainly will end up as, unless something happens to him, it is almost certain he will end up as Prime Minister at the time of Labour Party conference. Starmer, I understand this weekend, as we speak, his wife is talking to him. So make of that what you will. I have a feeling that the rumours surrounding Gordon Brown when he lost in 2010, that he wouldn't leave Downing Street, which was nonsense. Starmer, in his world, in Fantasyland, he thinks that he's popular and, I'm the Prime Minister and that's how it is. We are the longer he stays on, the more he'll be compared to Truss and Johnson. The best thing for him to do, really, is stand down immediately.
Which, don't suppose that's that likely, is it? Because people choosing to give up power. I think there were things, controversies in the Welsh Labour one. It was Guthing or something like that, and they didn't stand down immediately or refused to. So people don't necessarily do that, do they, when they're in a position of power?
Well, there was a Roman consul called Cincinnatus who was given dictatorial powers. The term dictator sort of meant something slightly different. But he was given dictatorial powers essentially to, I think it was the social wars, lead Rome through a period of turbulence. There was no need for him to relinquish power at all. Yet when he achieved what he was appointed to do, he went back to his farm and gave up his dictatorial powers, and that was him. Now, that might have been some time ago, but there are very few Cincinnatus characters in politics. Starmer most certainly isn't. But he can be in power, but he has no authority.
So what's the main? So I know it's hard to wrap up something like this, but what would the main reason you would say that his premiership, as they call it, has actually been a failure rather than a success so far?
As I say, so. There's a few things. In Britain, we hate career politicians, and yet if someone emerges out of nowhere, we're very suspicious about them. And that's firstly with Starmer. You had, for those involved in politics, however you're involved, we immediately saw that he was he was a liar. He has lied his way to become leader of the Labour Party. He, enabled some of the, worst sorts of abuse of individual MPs. He, as I say, removed the left. And then when he was elected, and again, he was. Labour really didn't do that well in 2024. It got 33, I think, 33.7%. That's nothing. And staggeringly, he thought that this was some great moment. But then, can anyone remember what was in Labour Party's manifesto? I do ask this question to people from time to time, and they can't.
I think I had a bit of a read of it, yes. But this goes back to the comment that you made, that it was not it was not a landslide so much as the Tories losing.
So you see some manifesto pledges. I mean, I would say that a lot of people could remember Corbyn's. I think if you were older and sort of before my time, you probably remember Michael Foot.
From 83, yes.
You'd have remembered, Wilson's, you'd have remembered Attlee's, but not this time. So what you then have is effectively you've got a manifesto pledges that are really, can be interpreted, the sort of half truths. And you see that he's appointed, I call her nasal thieves, but, Rachel Reeves, who, lied about her CV, lied about what she'd done, and instead of doing, anything remotely in favour of ordinary people, immediately came for them, and enabled trillionaires, and interference in politics, etc. You then see the attack from a Labour Party on, as again covered before, on the the disabled, the young, the vulnerable people in society and others, and people just didn't expect that from a Labour Party.
Because at first it was the winter fuel allowance. Of course, and then it was reversed. We have had the thing with disability, the benefits with the universal credit, with the cut of £50 a week for new claimants. We have had the renters reform bill, but
waspy women, etc., etc. There were so many examples, and whilst the press call them U-turns, I call them lies. And then what's worse is not even having the bottle to plough on. Now, I'm sure Starmer would say, but that's examples of me listening. Well, actually, if you were listening, you wouldn't have bothered to do anything like that in the first place. So, in effect, he's used the Labour Party's name and reputation as being, socialist or left, whatever. Again, it never has been. And plowed ahead in this very strange sort of zombie-like Francois Hollande style government, which, 3 years to implement the Employment Rights Act, and yet, we can put a ban in for social media by April. But you see, the priorities just seem to be really out of kilter. What I'm referring to, the Employment Rights Act, just for anyone uncertain, is the Employment Rights Act was brought in 2025, I think December, but the provisions of the Act are taking years to bring online, whereas other things, going through immediately or parliamentarily immediately, I should say. So then finally, with his unpopularity, I mean, he's never been a popular leader anyway. There's something that, whilst if you were to read what he'd said, when you listen to him, he doesn't sound genuine. He doesn't sound like he's doing anything than reading a script. Then, of course, when it came to Mandelson and, it's sort of trust me, well, no one did.
With the Epstein files, yeah.
And whether there's technicalities, I can show you my WhatsApp, but I have my, messages set to, to delete after 24 hours. Right, okay. I don't know that there's anyone who can't see what happened there. Starmer was invited.
They were set to delete after 24 hours, weren't they? Yeah.
Right, yeah, good point. Starmer ends up over at the Trilateral Commission with, the likes of Clinton, Trump, I think Epstein was there as well, Mandelson and all of this. He deliberately, flukes Labour's Brexit policy, shortly thereafter. And then I don't know anyone who just cannot see that you appointed Peter Mandelson because he had a relationship with Trump and it was mate traits. Mandelson went around building a network of MPs, some of which are MPs in Cumbria, for example, and elsewhere. Went around building a network. I'll, rub your back, you rub mine. I want this job. And we'll skip all of the usual vetting because, it's me, Mandelson. I mean, again, a figure, who has been dismissed so many times for his irregularities, shall we say, that it was a surprise to everyone that he was heading back there. Now, no one trusts him. It's too much. He hasn't taken decisive action on anything. And when we saw 100 MPs saying we don't want you, he then assumed, well, actually, there's a couple of hundred more who are with me. That's not really the case. So outside of the parliamentary Westminster bubble, on the streets, it's playing out that, we don't want this man. Final point, just as on reflection on the state of Britain, though. We used to mock Italy for going through prime ministers, a rate of sort of 5 or 6 a year kind of thing. Well, Britain's not actually that far behind.
No,
we seem to just be getting rid of leader after leader after leader. And my sense on that is because we haven't got many MPs who are from an ordinary background. We have a lot of rubbings of people's backs and people from yesteryear. And the distrust in politics is another reason why people are shifting to increasingly authoritarian parties, because the lies that surround politics, I mean, there have always been, you don't trust a politician kind of thing, but the extent of lies and cover-ups from, partying during lockdown to Mandelson, it damages, every scandal damages our belief in the democratic system. And incidentally, with Andy Burnham, let's be very clear when we're talking about him being a breath of fresh air. Whilst he's been a popular mayor, let's be clear, we're talking about someone who was last a minister under Gordon Brown.
When he was MP before, yes.
Yeah. So that notion of a breath of fresh air is certainly very interesting to me. Equally, there is change in the air. Let's see what he does. I remain a healthy skeptic. Whether or not he gets the keys and he's told that if you do this, then the bond markets will screw you over. We will have to wait and see.
Okay, so that's kind of a wrap up of the situation, and yeah, it was called "Change," the manifesto actually, and it was about things like what 1.5 million houses would be built is one thing, and there would be something about set up Great British Energy, a publicly owned clean power company. So I'm not sure if that's happened yet.
Well, again, right, we're going to have that. So if I read that, which I did, I thought, okay, they're going to try and nationalise energy. No. What they did is set up something like Sainsbury's Energy, a sort of middle person. Great British Energy doesn't generate any power. It's a broker, basically.
So that's that's less ambitious then, because I think with Jeremy Corbyn he was talking about nationalisation of things again, so that the country would have the assets that were previously sold off by the Conservatives in most cases. And the 1.5 million homes, I'm not sure that must be privately built. You do see a lot of new build houses being built in floodplains and not on floodplains.
They're not very good quality. I mean, I've had the fortune to have lived in houses that are well over, 150, 200 years old, that were built to stand the test of time. I can't see some of these new builds, even existing in 100 years' time.
So it's not just it's the quality of them, but also who they're for, because they're often £250,000 at the very least, or they could be up to £500,000 for what would have been an ordinary family house. I'm not sure whether the social housing buildings are there, so it's...
Well, again, if we're meant to be a home-owning democracy, I mean, I don't, certainly countries in Europe aren't, but that's because they have rent controls. I mean, if we want to be serious about building houses, you can't just do that. You have to have water infrastructure that isn't polluting rivers with excrement. You have to have a power supply. You have to have schools within the area, of which I was reading a couple of weeks ago about this one of the new villages, but there'll be a supermarket, there'll be all of this, and there's nothing. You can't. Building houses is one thing, but there has to be support then in road infrastructure, etc., etc. It's not just building houses in isolation. So it's a very good headline for a manifesto, but unless you're supporting it with everything else, it's pointless. They're houses that will be in the middle of nowhere, where people have to travel. Where's the bus routes? Where's the rail infrastructure? I mean, we can't even build a high-speed railway network in Britain, whereas in France, under budget, they've built, effectively, the length of HS2, sorry, under budget and ahead of time, because you remember one of the things that France and some other countries do is when people put in bids for construction, they don't just look at the lowest bidder, they look at quality of build. So there's all sorts of issues that I don't envy any prime minister, but again, I come back to it. It's about choices.
Yeah. I think so. And increasingly, this anti-immigration sentiment.
It's not. Sorry, Michael. It's not just even the anti-immigration sentiment. You're seeing attacks on trans people, LGBT pride events. I mean, what exactly is it those people are doing to impact people's lives? Why focus on it? It's again just an example of we'll try and distract people from our own failings in politics.
Yeah, I suppose what happened with Reform and the council, they run St Helens and then they wouldn't fund the St Helens Pride. Could be an example of what would happen.
Attacking LGBT people, does that help the cash in your pocket in any way? Does it reduce bills? Does it mean you can get access to a doctor quicker? No, of course it doesn't. And the amount of money that goes to Pride, sort of cultural events if you want, music events if you must, that do bring people in to come and spend money. You abolish them for just distraction. As we know in reform councils, for example, they're more interested in, was it the mayor of Lincoln, I think, was it £100,000 for a new office for her? You just think that, all of this becomes distraction. Focus on the things that matter. Looking after your neighbours, treating people kindly, and don't fall into the blaming of an individual, of a group, because you've been told something about an.
Because there's also that with Keir Starmer, because of the popularity of Reform, he's the government have made it look like they're being as tough on immigration. So it's like they're being pulled to the right as well. So
by quoting the Rivers of Blood speech, it's not exactly again not really what you would expect from a Labour Party, is it?
So quoting it now, so that's for example, moving from using the hotel, from using the hotels to other forms is an example of a move where they might have been influenced by by reform, perhaps. So yeah. Well, thanks for taking part in this. Looking at what the Makerfield by-election means, just as they've done on the mainstream media as well, but in the way that we've done it as well.
Well, thank you for having me on, Michael, and thank you. It often, one of the beauties of doing interviews, I have to say, is it is, get as many perspectives as possible. This is just my own. You can agree or disagree with my points. That's absolutely fine. We should be able to disagree as much as we agree. And, that's healthy to do so.
That was the insights of Jay Martin on our world. Society and politics. The Jay Martin Interview.